Okay, good morning. So we are doing today Nun Amid Aleph, and hopefully get into part of Nun Amid Base. So the Gemara where we left it off yesterday was at the two dots of Echad Asar of Echad Asar Riboy, about three lines down in the wide lines. So we're saying the Mishnah seems to suggest that the halacha is the same for 10, and then for 10 times Riboy, Riboy is 10,000. So the same would be true for 10 as for 100,000. And then we remember the Mishnah. The Mishnah told us all the different things that you say by the different amounts. So the Gemara says, what? How gufa kasha. The Gemara says, by definition, it doesn't make sense what you're saying. Amris echarasar v'echarasar riboy. You're saying that's the same when the halach is for 10 or for 100,000. Alma kiyadadi ninu. That sounds like that doesn't change what you say depending on the crowd. Bavadr katani. But later on we learn in the very Mishnah, b'meya Aimer this, be'elef Aimer that, b'riba Aimer the other thing. Right? Remember we said that we changed the amounts. Right? B'meya Aimer nevarach Hashem l'keinu. B'meya, then be'elef we said the nevarach Hashem l'keinu l'keisrael, and then the what do you call it? B'riboy nevarach Hashem l'keinu l'keisrael l'keisrael l'kruvim. So you see that you do change the formula. So do you change the formula? Do you not change the formula? So says the Gemara, I'm Rabbi Yosef like Hashem. It's not a problem. Why not? Ha Rabbi Yosef Aglili, ha Rabbi Akiva. There's a difference between Rabbi Yosef Aglili and Rabbi Akiva. In other words, in the Mishnah, if you remember, the end of the Mishnah said that this is again the Mishnah Mem Testament based on the bottom. The Mishnah told Rabbi Yosef Aglili says, "Lefi Rav Hakol Heim Mevarcha," that we are doing the type of bracha, the formula, based upon the crowd of people that's there. And the basis of Rabbi Yosef Glili was B'makeles Baruch Hashem. And Rabbi Kiva disagreed. Rabbi Kiva said, "Mamatzinu b'Saknesses echam rubim v'echam muatim." Whatever we find in a shul, what do we find in a shul? We find the same, no difference between the sides of the crowd. Says the Gemara saying that the Mishnah, when it says echad asar v'echad asar riboy, that it's the same. That's going according to who? That's going according to Rabbi Kiva. Because Rabbi Kiva doesn't change the formulas based upon the crowd. Rabbi Yosef disagrees. And so don't ask me a question about Echad Asar Echad Asar Riboy. In the context of discussing the opinion of Rabbi Yosef where we change the formula depending on the crowd, we also mentioned Rabbi Kiva's opinion, which says that the formula stays the same regardless of whether it's 10 or 100,000. 10 or 100,000. Continues the Gemara. The Tanan, because we learned it in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yosef I'm the figure of Hakol him of Archa. Based upon the crowd of people, that's how you make the bracha. Shnemim Makeles Baruch Hashem. Right, like the pasuk tells us. Right, in the crowds, we bless Hashem. And Rabbi Kiva disagrees. I'm Rabbi Kiva, Mamatzin Besek Knesses, Ech and Rub, Ech and Muat, and they say the same. Everybody says Baruch Hashem. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Kiva, Hai Kroj Rabbi Yosef Glili, my offered lay. So what does Rabbi Kiva do with Rabbi Yosef Glili's pasuk? In other words, Rabbi Yosef Glili has a source for why he says you should change the bracha. It says in pasuk b'makeles baruch elikim. So that means when you have a crowd, you make a special bracha. And Rabbi Kiva, he has to do something presumably with that pasuk too. He has to acknowledge the idea that if there's a crowd, he's supposed to make a special bracha. On that, the Gemara answer is he needs the pasuk of b'makeles baruch elikim for something else. What is that something else? L'chidetanya. Famous line from Meir says, how do you know that even fetuses said the Shira ad Kriyas Yamsov? So Rabbi Kiva is learning out from the Makeles Baruch Elakim the idea that even fetuses at Kriyas Yamsov said Shira, and therefore it's not available to him to make a halachic difference. In other words, it's as though he's taking Makeles Baruch Hashem and assigning it to a place that it's not going to have any halachic impact by virtue of the fact that he's saying that it only applies to the Uber by Kriyas Yamsuf. Whereas, according to the way Rabbi Glili is learning, it has practical impact. It has a practical bite, namely, depending on the size of your crowd. That depends on the formula of how you make the zima. So the Gemara says, oh, well, Rabbi Glili also presumably needs to believe, or needs to find a source for the idea that the Uber b'mei imai said Shiro. So what's his source? V'idach mimikar nafka. He dashes it from the word mikar, right? The pasuk says, "Makelas baruchu alakim, Hashem mimikar Yisrael." So Rabbi Kiva was learning that from Makelas, so it wasn't available for him to teach you anything about the formula. But for Rabbi Glili, Makelas is teaching you different formulas for the size of the crowd, and Hashem mimikar Yisrael, the makar, right? Like the womb is the makar. So that's where he learns out the idea that the Uber saying Shira b'mei imay. So the Gemara concludes Amarav Halach Rabbi Kiva. The Halach is really like Rabbi Kiva. What do we mean when we say the Halach is like Rabbi Kiva? So Rabbi Chananel here is quoted Taisvis. We'll just look at Taisvis. Taisvis says Amarav Halach Rabbi Kiva. What does it mean? Perish Rabbi Chananel the Halachi Karmel. This is in fact how we paskin v'hilkach bein ba'asara, bein b'meya, bein b'ribui. Depending on the size of the crowd, whether it's 10, 100, or 100,000, 10,000, etc. Aimer nevarach alekeinu. You should say nevarach alekeinu. Taisus adds in that you say nevarach alekeinu al hamazon shacham. Rabbi Chananel is not so clear that you necessarily have to say al hamazon. Like Rabbi Chananel says, "V'im yiratzel yomer al hamazon shacham mishal." You could add in this al hamazon, but you don't have to. Not sure why Taisus puts in that you have to, but Rabbi Chananel seems to say that you could, you don't have to. But it's the same blessing for 10 or for 100 or for 1,000 or for 10,000. It's all the same. So Aval begin below ask al hamazon, but by 3 you're not allowed to say al hamazon because like we said in the Gemara yesterday. Here he brings it down, right? So and when it comes to 10, if he doesn't want to say al hamazon, it's also okay. But right? You should say instead of saying al hamazon. If you look there in the Gemara in the narrow lines, right before the wide lines, the Gemara said. Rabbi Yochanan says if you say bar shechal mishalai, or you say tam chacham, if you say al hamazon shechal, how is that bar? Fine. So we pass on Rabbi Akiva. Now we go a little bit further in discussing this idea. Says the Gemara like this: Ravina v'Rav Chama Barbuzi yiklol lebeirish kalusa. Again, we have a lot of stories already so far in Brachot. I don't know how many, if you're counting, but certainly already in the high single digits, if not double digits, of how many times people had meals with the reish kalusa. Right? It seems to have been a very convivial setting where there's a lot of people, as we're going to see. So Ravina and Rav Chama Barbuzi were by the reish kalusa. Kam Rav Chama v'kom hada b'meya. Rav Chama started trying to count for 100 people. Remember yesterday, I quickly mentioned the Taisus on Mem Teslam Beis, the third to last Taisus, Amar Rabbi Kiva, Mam B'tzina Beis HaKnesses. So I quoted that line. It says, the ilu nechnasim, ve'elu yotzim v'lav adaite. It's very difficult to count how many people you have in the crowd because, the shul's the train station. People come in, they come out. But today we'll quote the next line of Taisus. Taisus also says, but by eating, people are sitting there by the meal, they make themselves kavua. They're not dancing around from place to place. So therefore, it's easier to count the crowd. So here you have Reb Chama. He wants to count how many people are there at the meal. Now you might ask, why is he counting? Right, what's the gain of counting how many people you have? He's being Mahadra Abe Meya. Why? Because he's number one. What you see here is the size of the meals by the Reish Kalusa, right? It's like a mamshah beach party. Number two, what do you see? You see that Reb Chama thinks that the halacha is like what? Like a Beis Haglili, not like Rabbi Akiva. So he wants to do the right bracha. So he wants to make sure they have 100. So Ravina says to him, you don't need to do this. You already learned that Rav said, halach Rabbi Akiva. Halach is like Rabbi Akiva, so you don't have to go hunting after a big crowd. Now, the what do you call the story here that I think is worthwhile to point out is that even though you thought that halacha was settled, Rabbi Akiva, that Rava said it was settled that it went to Rabbi Akiva, is clearly Rabbi Chaim Marbuzi wasn't aware of that, and Rabbi Ina is telling him, no, it's a very settled thing. Now look at the next story that we have. Amar Rava. Rava says, Ki achninu rifta be'resh kavusa, mevarachin and gimel gimel. So Rava says, when I would eat by the resh kavusa, we would divide up and bench. In other words, not just the fact that you don't say a different bracha, but we would divide up. We would make our own zimun, gimel gimel. We would break apart to do our own little mini zimun. Yud yud. So the Gemara says, well, why would you just do gimel gimel? We do acknowledge that there is a difference between gimel and yud. Right? By gimel, you don't say Elokeinu, but by yud, you do say Elokeinu. So the Gemara is asking on Rava. Rava is saying, when I would eat by the Reish Kalusa, we would do 3-3. So the Gemara says, but why do 3-3? Why not do at least 10? At least by 10, you get to say Elokeinu. So the Gemara says, no. If they did yud, shama Reish Kalusa ve'ikvid, then the Reish Kalusa would hear. Now the Reish Kalusa is like the Nasti, right? He's the leader of the Jewish community in Babel, and he has a lot of power. And they're afraid that if they say yud, if they make a zimut of 10 people to say Elokeinu, he's going to get angry. So the Gemara says, "V'nafku b'berchas of the Reish Kalusa." So I don't understand. Just wait till the big zimut of the Reish Kalusa. Says, no, I did the avishu kuliyam shmi. It's so noisy that they wouldn't hear it. I don't understand. If it's so noisy, then why would 10 people bench? Would the Reish Kalusa hear it? I'm not 100% clear. But clearly, they were afraid of annoying the Reish Kalusa. So therefore, since they felt they couldn't hear the benching for the whole crowd, so what they did was they benched privately. And Rashi tells us an additional point of interest here. It says Rashi, Mevarchin and Tlasa. Says Rashi, Reish Kalusa Marach B'Sudasa. The Reish Kalusa had a long meal. And Rav is saying, each one of us, we had 3 people, we would bench quietly, very, very quietly. Shush. And we would sit there after we finished benching until the Reish Kalusa finished his meal. And him and the people who were sitting with him would bench in a loud voice. Now, again, like we're saying, whatever the loud voice was, they didn't feel they could be yotze with it. What does that mean? I'm not 100% sure. Again, like I said, Shama Reish Kalusa. If the Reish Kalusa would hear, says Rashi, in order to actually 10 people, you'd have to really raise your voice. And the Reish Kalusa could hear and get angry. Because we're making our own little group in public. Says Rashi, even though Rashi says that they're taking themselves out of the zimun when they could say Elokeinu, even though when the Reish Kalusa is going to later on make the benching, they're not going to be yotze with him because they already benched. Kedam Rabbatei, as we're going to see in a second, I feel it was nevertheless still worth it to them. Mishum because it was so loud. He said that even though the guy tried to do a kol ram, whatever it would be, it was such a noisy crowd that they wouldn't be able to hear. And so therefore, in order to make sure that they were yotze the Brachot of Zimun, they would bench quietly themselves. But they wouldn't do 10 because they didn't want to incur the wrath of the Reish Kalusa. It's interesting because we say that let's say your father tells you to do an affair. You have a mitzvah of kibbut aveim, right? You have a mitzvah of kibbut aveim. So what you listen to? You listen to your parents and tell you to do an affair or not? We say no. Why? Because your father and you both mechuyev have kav for the Eibishter. So if your father tells you that you have to, your father tells you have to do an avera, You could say, I'm sorry, it's not a kibbut of aim here. Why not? Because you're also mechuyev to listen to the Rebbe Shalom. So over here, it's obviously a bigger mitzvah to be Mizamu with 10. It's a bigger mitzvah to be Mizamu with 10. It's not a question. You say you get a chance to bring in Hashem's name. So tell the Reish Gusa to go, kakaf and yam, you're going to be upset? Too bad. They obviously didn't feel that they were able to do that. And therefore, they made the bracha with 3, the kol namuch, so as not to incur his wrath. Even though you may have thought that, oh no, even he's required to listen to the Rebbe Shalom, since it's better to say like Canaan, they should do it. No, they didn't do that. All right. Continues the Gemara. Now we meet a character who only appears 3 times in Shas, like this, Amarabba Teisva. But in Rava Teisva appears many more times in Shas. So who was Rabba Teisva? Rabba Teisva was the same person. He was a student of Ravina. And the Rishonim says the reason he's called Teisva is because he's one of the people that is the last adding on to Shas. That's why they gave him the name. He's like a Balia Teisvus. You know what I mean? He's a Teisva. They literally gave him that as part of his name. That's how he's to be known forevermore. Maybe he added it for himself in Shas to be known as his moniker. I have no idea. But that's how he's known. And he says like this. Hani Gimel Dekrachi Riftavad Yadadi. You have 3 people that are eating together. The Kadam Chad Minayu Baruch Ladaite. And then one of them jumps along and benches. Inun Nefikin Bezimun Didei. Everyone is now yoked with his Zimun. In other words, he has to go to the trains. He says, okay, let's bench. And I think people still want to eat. So when he benches, they answer, now everyone's yoked with the Zimun. You like nothing Bezimun to do. Right? They're going to be yotze with his Zimun, but he's not going to be yotze with theirs. Because there's no Zimun backwards. What do we mean? I mean as follows. Says Rashi, so again, sorry, I wasn't clear. If you have 3 people, they're eating bread together. And one person jumps ahead and he benches for himself without a zimun. So inun nefikin b'zimun didei. Then they would be able to be yotze with his zimun, but he cannot be yotze with theirs. Why? Because you don't have zimun l'mafreya. Says Rashi, mishaberach. Once you already benched, b'dei zimun lo yotza, and you weren't yotze on zimun, then you can't go back. So that is to say, Rabbi Tosfos is pointing out that so long as the group, quote unquote, benched, then when the demon's already finished, and when these people, the 2 left remaining ones, want to bench, there is no ability now to do Zimun. You just bench. There's no additional Zimun. They already were yotze whatever the Zimun had. Nafkin b'Zimun today, right? They can be yotze with his Zimun, but he, right, will not be able to be yotze with theirs. If they wanted to include him now when they bench, it's already over. The mitzvah of Zimun was already completed. What do you mean it's already completed? Because it was already done. I'm not sure what Rashi means here. Baruch Ladai Zimun. I thought the way that the Gemara was typically understood was meaning he benched and they were not being yotze with his Zimun, whereas he was not being able to be yotze with theirs later on because it's already finished. The Zimun's already over. So this is the last part of the Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel said that you say Baruch Hu Hashem HaMefarach. Rabbi Kiva said you say Baruch Hu Hashem, and Rabbi Shmuel said you say Baruch Hu Hashem HaMefarach. So the Gemara says Rav from Bar Papa Iklo Beknishta the Abi Giber. The Rav from Bar Papa got to the shul in a place called Abi Giber, and Kam Kar B'Sifra, and he got up to get an aliyah. V'amar Baruch Hu Hashem Be'ishtik, and he just said Baruch Hu Hashem, and he was quiet. He didn't say Baruch Hu Hashem HaMefarach. B'lei Amar HaMefarach. So if Shekuliam Baruch Hu Hashem HaMefarach, so everybody got very angry and they started screaming at him. Baruch Hu Hashem HaMefarach. Why did you say Baruch Hu Hashem? So Amar Rava, so Rava responds to Rav from Bar Papa, and he says, Pasya Uchma. We had this Uchma Sabasa, so remember I'm back on Vav, that you black pot, the Hadi Plut, the Lamalach. Why are you getting involved in Machlekes between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel in the Mishnah? Rabbi Kiva said that you say Baruch Hashem, and Rabbi Shmuel said you say Baruch Hashem, I'm Mevairach. And who are you, Rav from Bar Papa? We use you in all our hadrons, but seriously, why are you jumping ahead and getting involved in this machlekes Tanaim? And the whole world follows Rabbi Shmuel. Hey, have you ever been to a shul where somebody says Baruch Hashem? No. Everyone says Baruch Hashem, I'm Mevairach. And so therefore the halacha is like that, and enough with this, showing off, what this machlekes is, and you're going through your being chayshish for Rabbi Kiva, because remember, we said it a lot, like Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi said, this is enough. You just do Baruch Hashem like everybody else. So Rashi explains, what do you mean? Why are you getting involved in this machlekes? You can go through Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva might. It's not like Rabbi Kiva says you can't say I'm a Vairach. He agrees that I'm a is even nicer, but he says you don't need to do it. Now, this line here, right? What was Rav from Bar Papa thinking? What was his havamina to go through Rabbi Kiva? Right? Because he's not like Rabbi Chama Babuzi, right? He knows that Rav said halach is like Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva says in the Mishnah that by Asara Riboy, and halakha is the same, and presumably assumed as well. So Rabbi Kiva's proof that by 10 and by 10,000, 100,000, it's all the same, was based upon the fact that you go to shul and everything's the same. Everybody says Baruch Hashem. So when Rava said Allah Rabbi Kiva, what does Rava mean? So Rav my Papa understands that he means the halakha is like Rabbi Kiva in all aspects. The halakha is like Rabbi Kiva in the sense that you don't change by 10, you don't change by 100, you don't change by 1,000, 10,000, all the same. But the proof of Rabbi Kiva, that when you go to shul, they say Baruch Hashem, that's exactly right too. That's also part of Rabbi Kiva saying, you always say Baruch Hashem. It's not just Baruch Hashem being used for the fact that you don't change from 10 to 100, but no, the formulation of Baruch Hashem is also part of that halakha that says Rabbi Kiva. So therefore, when he comes to the shul, he wants to show that I'll speak Rabbi Kiva in all facets. That's what Rav in fact meant. So therefore, that's what he does. And the response over here of Rava is what? Rava is the one who said that Allah is like Rabbi Kiva. Rava is the one who's saying it. So Rava is enjoying it. Right? Rava is the one who said Allah is like Rabbi Kiva. So Rava sees Rav, our Papa, take him literally. Office like Rabbi Kiva in all aspects. So Rav tells him, Pasyoch, right? Black pot, in other words, it's a term of endearment, right? You're mamish, such an unbelievable, you learned so much, you mamish, you scorched yourself, to become such a Talmid Chacham. But how do you put the law? You don't have to get involved in this machlekes Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Yisrael. Clearly, because ultimately, even Rabbi Kiva agrees, he doesn't say that Baruch Hashem and Baruch is wrong. He was just saying you don't need to do it. But if the whole world is doing Baruch Hashem HaMevairach, you go with the whole world. Go with Rabbi Shmuel here. Even Rabbi Kiva is not disagreeing. He's just talking about the minimum. But the whole world took on a more additional bracha, additional blessing of their Rebbeinu Shalom. So do it. That's, I think, the background to explain the back and forth over here. Now, as a halachic matter, this is a very fascinating line to me. You remember we had a similar line back on Memhei. Or at the top of Memhei. Anybody at the top of Memhei? What's the Memhei? Yeah, the top of Memhei right before the end of the parak. While they was talking about the bracha on water, remember the machlekes, you say burning fashas rabbi shahako. So the Gemara over there said, Hilchos Samai, last lines before the parak. Amar lei peik chazi mai ama davar. Go see what the nation is doing, says Rashi. See what the people are doing. And the custom was to say shahako before. And a little bit so if you say burning fashas rabbis v'chasrayim. This idea that you follow what the people are doing, right? We have a concept, though. I should say a joke, but it is a concept. The items of Gailam. Why do you have to follow the people? No. We're saying it's not the items of Gailam. You don't follow them. There's value to what the people say. And you can learn from that. Where we have a Gemara in Pesachim. The Gemara has a machlokes there. Bar Yafa says that you make havdalah on Motzei Shabbos and Motzei Yom Kippur. You have to use Eish. Right? You have to have a fire. So the Gemara says over there that, and the way the Gemara concludes is that what he said is v'cheini ma'adavar. So too, that's what everybody does. There's no more machlokes, nothing to discuss. That's what the people do. That's what you do. Later on there in Pesachim, that's the Gemara in Pesachim and Dal, but Samach Vav in Pesachim, the Gemara tells us there. Coming out to Pesach, so we use examples of Pesachim. The Gemara says a story, a whole very interesting story about Hillel, how Hillel got the job, becoming the Nasi. Remember the Gemara, the Bnei B'Seira, they were the Nesiim, right? They were the ones in charge, and there was a question what to do about something that's related to Yoni Pesach, and they didn't know, and Hillel knew, so they installed Hillel. And then there was a question on Erev Pesach, Shechal Yos b'Shabbos. How do you get the knife to the Beis Hamikdash? It's carrying on Shabbos. So the Gemara asked, how do they do it? And Hill didn't know the answer. So instead of Hill getting deposed the way he deposed the Bnei B'Seira, he has a different response. Hill says, Hanach Lehad Yisrael. Im Einon Nevi'im Ein, B'nei Nevi'im Ein. Says, don't worry about it, Hill says. You don't have to worry about this question. The Jewish people, if they're not prophets themselves, they're the sons of prophets. They know what to do. And that morning, that Shabbos, which is Erev Pesach, the crowd came in, and the animals were all carrying the knives, the shepsels. Right? That's a kind of you're carrying the implement for your own destruction, but that's literally how it happened. So what do you see from these situations? You see over here that you go based upon the crowd. The crowd, you can follow the crowd. The crowd knows what they're doing. It's in a number of situations. A couple of Mars Menachos also about this. Zumar Menachos about tefillin. Ritzuis. So Mars says, go see what the people are doing. It's a Menachos also, and the Yavamas, the Gemara talks about if Eliyahu Navi is going to come, Lovely is going to tell the people that you're able to do chalitza with a sandal. Then we're going to listen to him, right? But if he said over that, that you can't use a sandal, then we're not going to listen to him. Why? Because the Nago Elam, everybody uses sandals for chalitza. So I'll just conclude this one last point, which is, do you really follow the people for everything? This is like you look outside and see what the people are following, and just do that. That's the custom. A lot of times this becomes relevant in relation to Das Moshe and Das Yehudas. Mars and Ksuba is about sneas. What's required, right? This Das Moshe is like certain things that you can't move. Like we had the Mars before about Shek Bisha Erva, right? Kol Bisha Erva, right? Sar Bisha Erva, all the different things. So I wasn't there that day, but this is a topic, a huge topic, which is when is it absolute and when does it depend on the custom of the people? Some issues of sneers are depending on the crowd, depending on what the people do. I don't want to get into now how far that extends, but in certain situations, that's what the crowd does. That's what the crowd does. The Kesef Mishnah, another Talmud Torah, that has a line that's used by a lot of Poskim after, and everybody quotes the line like this. So the Rambam very famously tells us in in Talmud Torah, but it's really this big thesis statement is in the Mishnah Novice. Mishnah Novice in Dalit, Mishnah Haimim, tells us on the line of the Mishnah says that a Torah shouldn't be a kaitam lafka. We did this in the Kailo classes 2-3 years ago, if you remember. Right, the Ram has a very famous, very long essay where he says you have to work. Even the greatest Talmidei Chacham, times the Mishnah, Talmud, they all worked. And in Hilchos Talmud Torah repeats that. And the Kesef Mishnah there disagrees. And the Kesef Mishnah says, well, you could say maybe it's Eis Lasses Lashem. That's a possibility. In other words, sometimes things change because the situation changes. But another possibility is that the Kol Mokem Shehalacha Refefes Biyadai Halach Achar. Whenever you have a situation where you're not sure about something, then you follow the minhag. That is to say, you don't just look at the minhag blindly. You have to first have a doubt. You're not deciding a halacha if you don't have a doubt. If you know what the halacha is, the fact that the item is doing what they want, so the items are good. It's a minhag shtus. We care what they do. But if you're not sure what the halacha is, like imagine a story by Hill. So then you know. In this case, Rav is telling Rav and my Papa, there's no question about what the halacha is. Everyone wants Rabbi Shmuel. That's what you do. All right, continues the Mishnah. So you have 3 people. They're eating together as one. They can't separate. So do 4 and 5. Right, by 6 you can split again to 2. Out of Asar until you get to 10. Because by Asar you say Lekenu, so now you can't split again. By 10 to 20 you can't split at all. Because they'll miss out on a Lekenu. Once you get to 20, then you can split into 2. If 2 people sitting in one house, when you have some seeing one to the other, then they're able to mitzdarf. And if they can't see each other, then they can't be mizamnin together. They have to do separate. We can't drink wine until you first put in water. Some say you could make a bracha on the wine even before you put in water. Remember, the wine in those days was very powerful, and so therefore really wasn't normal to drink it without first watering it down, diluting it. Says the Gemara, what's the big chiddush here that you're telling me that they are not able to separate? We know. Already had anything more before told us. On the ham and base, right? We learned Gimel. We already learned that 3 people who eat together, they have to have a zimun. Simor says, we have a chiddush. What's the chiddush? Yehad Amar Rav, Abba Amar Shmuel. The chiddush is like this. Gimel sheyesh ulechol ka'achatz. We have 3 people that they're sitting and eating together as one. V'adayin loy achlu. You have 3 people sitting together to eat as one. V'adayin loy achlu. But they didn't yet eat. The halacha is they already have a din. Excuse me, of a chabur together, so they can't separate, even though they didn't yet start eating. That's the chiddush, and not the chiddush that such that they have to do a zima together. Of course, the chiddush is that they're not able to be mechalik even before they start eating. Once they already agreed to sit and they're sitting down together. Another version is Abraham Amar Shmuel. This is the chiddush. You have 3 people that are sitting to eating together as one. Even though each person is eating from his own bread. In other words, they're eating together, but in name only, right? They each have their own provisions. They're not eating together the meal. They're each eating their own meals. They happen to be sitting together. So they can't separate, right? We already had this idea before that just because you're eating separate foods, but you're eating together, that still constitutes a group in order to be able to make a zimun. Another potential limud that we're learning out from this chiddush of Gimel She'achol Ka'achas Eino Masher Mechalik. Another potential option is Gimel Shebo Gimel Chaburos. You have 3 people that come from 3 different chaburos. Eino Masher Mechalik. They're not allowed to separate. In other words, as Rashi explains, for whatever reason they left their chaburos, whether they were allowed to or not, I'm not sure. There's a big debate here. Rashi, the Rebbeinu Yonah, etc. What exactly is going on here? But the simple reading, which we'll do here for now, You have three people that came from three chaburas. So you have three chaburas sitting there. One person left from each one of those chaburas, and they joined up together now. Rashi says they joined up together. They're going to be mechuyev now in zimun. So now one from each got together, and now they're being mitzvah into a new chabura. They have a chiyuv to make a zimun together. And they're not able to separate right? Because they already are mechuyev in zimun from the fact that they were sitting with a different chabura. Even if they didn't themselves eat together, but they're sitting together, they're still going to have to bench because they already have a chiyuv of zimun, and now they're sitting together, so they'll bench with these people. So gimel shabbat and gimel chaburos and Rosh Hashanah. When you have three people that come from three different chaburos, they can't separate. That's only true that you can't separate. If you came from three chaburos or three people, obviously, if there was more, then you would be able to, to leave. So long as you still did a zimun. Amarava, turn the page now. Base. That's only true that you're able to separate out and make a new group together. They'll now be mizam together. That's only in a situation if you were not included in the zimun of the original group. But if the original group already benched on you, right, they include you in the zimun, then it's over. Remember this is what that Bart was that Rabbi Tosfos said, right? He said that ain zimun l'mafreya, right? Once you're included in the zimun, it's over. There's no new zimun. It's over. Your chiyuv of zimun is finished. So if the original group included you in the zimun, so then you don't have a zimun to do anymore. It's finished. Right? Even if you didn't bench with them, right? You're benching now. Yeah. Says the Gemara. Amar Rava. So Rava wants to explain himself. How do I know this halacha that I'm telling you that if you're already included in zimun that you're done, and that you're not going to be included in another one? It's an on because we have a Mishnah. Mishnah in Kalim tells us Mita shenig nivba chetzia. Right? You have a bed that half of it was stolen, of the chetzia, or half of it was lost. I don't really know how their beds work. How do you lose a bed as half of it gets stolen? But whatever it is, we're talking about a situation here about a bed that was tameh. Right? And we know that Hilchos Tumah, that when you break something, right, we'll have the psukim Vayikra, that when you break something, the tumah goes away, right? So here you have a keli. The keli is the bed. When the keli breaks, in this case, the bed or stolen, whatever, half it's gone. So then it's going to lose its tumah. Or maybe brothers divided it to shutfin. So tahir the halacha is that the bed is going to be tar. Heck, zero, right? If it gets now returned, so somehow the half of bed comes back. So then mekabelas tumah mikana lahaba. Then it's going to be able to accept tumah from now on in. Says the Gemara mikana lahaba en mafreya. From now on, we'll accept tumah, but not lemafreya. What do you mean mikana lahaba? Not lemafreya, because mikana lahaba in the future it's going to be able to accept tumah because it's a regular keli now. Well, lemafreya to go back to its original status of tumah. No, why? Because that was broken apart when the bed broke, or when it was stolen, or whatever it was. Says Rava, Alma given the palgua parach latuma. When you see when it's split, the tumah goes away. The palgua parach latuma minay. Hachanami given the ezem and alayu parach zimun minay. Let's talk to when you have a zimun. So the chiyuv of zimun that you have is now finished. It's over. All right, let's just try to finish a couple more lines. Says the Gemara. Right, the Mishnah told us that if you have two groups that are sitting, right, Beis Chaburis, the Mishnah told us that they're sitting in one house. If they see each other partially, then it's okay. Says the Gemara. If they, and Rashi Taisus explained, if they don't see each other, but you have a waiter that's going back between the two meals, so then it's also mitzvah for the two together to be considered as one. Taisus points out. Taisus points out that what's the reason that we're saying one house? Why don't we say two houses? Taisus says it's the chiddush because You might have thought in one house for sure you could be able to examine. It's one house. No. But it's true even the halacha in two houses. In other words, if let's say you had two houses next to each other, you have one waiter going running back and forth, they can still be mitzvah. Again, what's the tzira? Are they going to hear the berachas hamazon? I'm not sure, but at least in theory, if it was possible. Then is the Gemara. Ein mevarchin al yain. The Mishnah told us you're not able to make a bracha on yain before you add it in water. The Tanakama said, "Tana rabbanan yain actually nasil techimayim ein mevarchin al bar pri agafen el bar pri eitz." Right, it's not a normal thing to drink before you add in water. And according to Blaise, you can even make Netilas Yadayim on the yain. Tais points out from here, so the kan mashma the may paris kasher Netilas Yadayim. You could use juice for Netilas Yadayim. Again, obviously, it's a situation where somehow there wasn't water, then obviously not. But as Tais concludes, but people do say that you should have water for Netilas Yadayim. It's not enough to use may paris. But once you put in water, then you can make a bar pri agafen. Then you can't use it for Netilas Yadayim. Different belezer. What are you talking about? You can always say agafen, even if it's not normal to drink it, you still say agafen. Right? Rashi's saying that the reason that Rabbi Lezer would say that you say al bar pri eitz on yain that didn't put in mayim contra Lezer is because the shei mayim beloved it's still considered water because it's not drinkable in a normal way. So in a sense, it's just the same bracha you make when you eat grapes. You can never use the wine for Netilas Yadayim. Kiman Asla says the Gemara. Who is it going with? Question being, who's what going with? So Taisa says, Kiman Asla the other Amar Shmuel. We're trying to based on what we just said. So Rabbi Lezer says this idea that you could use undiluted water for undiluted wine for as like water to do it yesterday and make a eitz on it, etc. Kiman Adam Shmuel Isa Adam Kol Terach of the path. You have a similar concept like this that Shmuel says you can do all your needs with bread. Kiman, who's this going like Rabbi Lezer? Like Rabbi Lezer. Okay, we'll have to stop over here. All right, guys.